Hi, I'm Ryan Thomas with EastWest, and this is the official walkthrough for EastWest Voices of Passion, a collection of exquisitely detailed cinematic vocals featuring world-class soloists from America, Bulgaria, India, Syria, and Wales, all singing in the traditional styles of each region. So in this video, we're going to not only explore the basic mechanics of the library, but we're also going to talk about the various ways that you can use each vocalist to add just a stunning depth of color and life to your compositions. We'll also cover how Voices of Passion integrates with the new EastWest Opus player to produce a library that's both endlessly flexible and easy to use. So let's start off by just talking about the basic folder structure of the library, as well as the various articulations that are available for each singer. So Voices of Passion is divided into 5 main folders. You have America, Bulgaria, India, Syria, and Wales. And in America, you have various words, as well as some sustains, both legato and portamento. In the Bulgaria folder, you've got some really cool breath articulations, as well as some phrases. And in India, you have just a lot of different phrases, same for Syria. And then in Wales, you have both some ah and o sustains, as well as a rather large selection of words. Now, one of my favorite new features of the Opus player is the ability to audition instruments without having to load them. So you probably already have a good idea of what a violin section or maybe a harp sounds like, but you probably don't know what the American vocalist sounds like versus, say, the Syrian vocalist. So all you have to do, if you want to get a vibe for one of these singers, is just click on one of the patches, and Opus will play a short audio example of that patch. So let's try Syria. And now here's Wales. And let's hear one of those breath articulations from Bulgaria. Now, the other really cool thing about the Audition feature is that you can audition instruments that you haven't downloaded or installed to your machine yet. And also, if you want to just install a single patch without having to download the rest of the library, Opus gives you the option to do that. And you can turn this feature on or off and also adjust the volume. Now, let's talk about the various kinds of patches that you'll find in Voices of Passion. And let's start with the Master Keyswitch patch. And this is going to contain most of the articulations available for a vocalist. And you can switch between the various articulations using these blue notes on the keyboard. Now, a really smart new feature of the Opus player is the articulation matrix. And this can be so useful when you're dealing with these very large key switch patches like this one, because it shows you which articulation is active, and it also allows you to completely customize the articulation mapping. So you can set this articulation, for example, to a different note or to a different parameter altogether. So let's hear a couple of these, starting with the Bulgarian 8. And let's hear the melody. Now, the elements patches are going to be similar to the key switch patches. They'll have all the same articulations, but rather than key switching between the articulations using notes on the keyboard, you'll just load them and unload them manually by clicking on these little buttons here. And one of the cool things about the elements patches is that they do allow you to stack articulations, so you can get some pretty cool effects like this. I could hear that sounding pretty cool in a number of contexts. Now, the Wales and America folders both contain some different kinds of sustains. In Wales, you'll find both legato and portamento sustains, as well as the DXF sustains, which stands for dynamic crossfade. And these are really cool patches because they are going to crossfade between the dynamic layers using the mod wheel. Man, you can just be so expressive with those. And I should point out that all the other patches in Voices of Passion are going to be velocity sensitive. But of course, the DXF patches are going to have their dynamics controlled with the mod wheel. And finally, the legato and portamento articulations are just going to give you those nice transitions between notes. Of course, the legato patches are going to have shorter transitions, whereas the portamento patches are going to give you those slightly longer transitions. So here is one of the legato patches. All right, so now that we've kind of gone over the nuts and bolts of the library, let's go ahead and just play around with it a little bit and hear what each individual vocalist has to offer. And let's listen to some of the articulations played in isolation, and then we'll show you how they can be used in context. And let's start in the America folder. So we just have the master Keyswitch patch pulled up here. And this, of course, is going to be ideal for more straightforward Western-style orchestrations and arrangements. So it's got some nice vowel sustains. And here is a ah to an oo evolving articulation. This one also has a couple articulations that could work well in a horror context. And there are also some short articulations. So here is the do. And here is an ah staccato. And this Keyswitch patch also contains various words, but they're spoken very slowly, so they almost come across more as an evolving texture than an actual word, which is a good thing, I think. And these are really useful when you just need to add something a little bit more colorful and interesting to an orchestration that's not just a simple vowel sustain. So here are a few of those. I also really love the breathy oo. All right, now let's revisit the legato and portamento patches, because there was one thing that I wanted to show you as it relates to one of the new features of the Opus player. So I'm going to load up this portamento patch, and like I mentioned earlier, basically all of the patches in Voices of Passion are going to be velocity sensitive, except of course for the dynamic crossfade patches. And that can be kind of a double-edged sword depending on your particular workflow. So here is the oo portamento patch. So those dynamics were controlled both by CC11, which I have mapped to my mod wheel, as well as the velocity. But with the MIDI compressor, which is one of the new MIDI tools that comes with EastWest OPUS Player, you can essentially make it so that a given articulation will only respond to CC11 by just completely leveling out the velocity. So I have a setting that I've already made, which I'm calling constant velocity, and I've set the threshold to 0 and the ratio all the way up with the makeup velocity set to 40, which essentially means that no matter how hard I hit a key on the keyboard, Opus is always going to read it as just a velocity of 40. So now here is that same patch with the MIDI compressor applied. So you can hear how that MIDI compressor kind of smooths things out a little bit. And that just works slightly better for my particular workflow. So now that you've heard all of these articulations in isolation, let's hear how they can be used in context. And next up is Bulgaria, and this one just contains some absolutely stunning articulations that range from a number of chants to complete melodies, all the way to just simple vowels and some short phrases. And I found this vocalist to be quite versatile because the vocal timbre ranges from ethereal and mellow, sometimes even a little bit eerie, all the way to very edgy and kind of feral. So it could even work very well in a battle scene. But in general, I think this vocalist works well in any fantasy or dark fantasy context, especially one that involves Slavic elements. I won't name any names, The Witcher. Yeah, so in general, I think the Bulgarian vocalist works well for any film, TV show, or video game that involves elements from Eastern European folklore. So we'll start off with some of the chants, and these just evolve so beautifully and interestingly that you could put these over a very simple orchestration and really just bring a lot of life to it. So of course, some of those are on the more mellow side, some start to get a little bit edgy. Here's one that I think is really edgy and works well in a battle scene. And here are some of the melodies. Now these are going to be in the key of the actual key that you're holding down. So if you're playing an E, then this melody is going to be in the key of E. Here is the second melody. Here's the Oho calling. Here's the second one. Here is the sheep call. That one's kind of eerie sounding to me. And here is just the oo, and this just has a really nice timbre to it. And let's skip a few of these and go straight to the heya. And here is the laha. All right, so now that we've heard most of these articulations in isolation, let's see how these work in context. And now we are in India, and these phrases tend to be very long, and they are the most colorful and technically complex out of the Voices of Passion library. And because of that, I think they stand very well on their own, and they do well as the star of the show. And a common theme in many of these phrases is a moment of tension followed by a release. Tension and then resolution. So a lot of these will work quite well against a simple drone, and a lot of them will also work well with a percussion loop. So some ideal companion libraries to the India phrases would be Storm Drums 2 and 3, as well as a lot of the content from Silk and Raw. So let's go ahead and start listening to some of these phrases. Unfortunately, I can't play all or even most of them for you because each one of these notes is a unique phrase, and there are 10 different key switches. So this one key switch patch contains literally hundreds of different phrases. I should also point out that you can use the mod wheel to shorten these phrases. So at the lowest values, you'll get the full phrase. But then once you increase it past a certain threshold, it shortens the phrase. So there's a lot of variation here, and there are just so many different phrases available. I'm sure you can find something that fits your piece. Okay, let's go ahead and hear how these work in the context of a composition. Now, the Syrian vocals were just sung with a raw passion that makes them very emotionally evocative. And much like with the Indian vocals, there are literally hundreds of different, completely unique phrases. Each one of these keys is a different phrase, and there are 12 different key switches. So of course, these are going to be ideal for any soundtrack that's written for a production set in the Middle East. But I think that these are quite a bit more versatile than that. I like to use the Syrian phrases for an orchestration that might otherwise just be a little bit on the dull side, because these just very quickly add so much life and color to any composition. So here are some of those phrases, and just remember that the key of the phrase is going to be the key of the key switch. So we're going to start in C and just kind of move our way up. And just like with the India phrases, the mod wheel will shorten the phrases past a certain value. So here is the full phrase. And here is the shortened version. Now, one of the most brilliant features of the new Opus player is the ability to load samples on demand. So right now, this Keyswitch patch is using 89.3 megabytes of RAM because it's loaded all of the phrases contained in the Keyswitch patch into memory. But realistically, you're probably going to end up using maybe 4 or 5 of these phrases at most in an entire composition. So if you want to save on RAM, you can just purge the instrument from memory, and then Opus is only going to load what it absolutely needs to in order to play back the notes that you're playing. So watch as the RAM usage slowly ticks up as I trigger these phrases. So this feature can be a real game changer, especially if you are working with limited RAM. Okay, so now that we've heard some of these phrases in isolation, let's hear how they work in the context of a full composition. And finally, we are in Wales, and these vocals take a slightly different approach from the others in that they aren't centered around these long, colorful phrases. Rather, EastWest has opted to just provide you with as many building blocks as possible. So there are a number of different kinds of sustains. There are a number of different words that you can string together to create an evolving sort of sequence. And let's go ahead and start off here with the vowels key switch. So this is going to contain all of the common vowels that you will hear in most vocal sustains. So let's start off in the oohs. Here's the ah. So as you can hear, these are just so delicate and ethereal, which I think makes them ideal for anything fantasy or fantasy adjacent. Now let's check out the words key switch patch. And this obviously contains quite a few different words. And I like to string these together to create these evolving sequences. And it sounds very ethereal and otherworldly, especially with the timbre of these vocals. And one thing that I really like to do with this patch in particular is add a stereo delay. So we're going to do that in the mix window that is new with the EastWest OPUS player. And you can see there are just a ton of different effects to choose from, but we are going to add an effects channel, and we're going to throw on the EP1 delay. I'm going to recall a setting that I've already made for this. You can see all the parameters here if you want to recreate this. And then we're just going to send some of the signal from this mic to that delay. So let's go ahead and hear it. So you can hear how that delay just kind of makes this feel like it's floating, and it's already so ethereal and delicate. I think that delay really complements this patch in particular. And finally, let's check out one of the legato articulations. And there really isn't much to this. I think it's very easy to play. I think it would sound really good in any piece with a Celtic vibe to it, or once again in a fantasy context. So here is the legato ah. All right, now let's hear how the Wales vocals bring our next composition to life. All right, and that is going to conclude this walkthrough. I hope you enjoyed it and were able to come away with some useful information. I do want to remind you that all of the instruments and reverbs that were used in this video are included with a Composer Cloud Plus subscription. So if you liked this content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.